Hello there. Okay, so the second moment of Kant's Analytic of the Beautiful is focused on the judgment of taste, which is what he calls aesthetic judgments. It's really the experience of the beautiful, but he wants to speak of a kind of judgment that takes place, which is true if you think about it. When you do experience something as beautiful, you're making sort of an internal judgment that this is beautiful or this is not so beautiful. There's these feelings of pleasure or pain, he says. So the first moment had to do with quality, the judgment of taste according to quality. And that quality, namely, is disinterest. So you should notice at the end of every moment of the Analytic of the Beautiful, it ends with a summarizing statement which contains the nugget, the epitome of everything he's been talking about in all the sections before that. So as you should note, then at the end of all the four moments is a partial definition of the beautiful. So moment one ends with taste, and of course by that he means judgments of taste, which are synonyms to aesthetic judgments or beauty judgments. Taste is the faculty of judging an object or a method of representing it by an entirely disinterested satisfaction or dissatisfaction. The object of such satisfaction, such disinterested satisfaction, is called beautiful. So notice the beauty is not in the object. We speak as though an object or a thing is beautiful or an activity or whatever it is. But really, it's in the subject. It's something subjective for Kant, okay? So the thing you need to get your head around to understand is his notion of disinterest, and associate disinterest with desire. There's a little quote in my translation here where there was another philosopher, his name was Mendelssohn, who Kant probably had read. And in a book called History of Philosophy, Mendelssohn wrote, it appears, Mendelssohn says, to be this judgments of the beautiful, to be a particular mark of the beautiful, that it is contemplated with quiet satisfaction. This by quiet, he doesn't mean you're not talking or there's no noise. He means that inside your subjectivity, there's no desire to possess the object. As he goes on, it pleases, even though it be not in our possession. In other words, it's disinterested. There's no desire there. We don't desire the object in any way. And even though we be never so far removed from the desire to put it in our use. So that helps to understand Kant's notion of disinterest. Now, let's move to moment two, where he focuses now, rather than the quality of the aesthetic judgment, he's talking about the quantity. So quantity is how much. And the quantity of the judgments of taste is going to be something universal. Now, he says the beautiful is that which, apart from concepts, this is the part we need to try to understand. Apart from concepts, not using concepts. So you need to know what a concept is, the way Kant is thinking of it. A concept is an abstract idea, okay? And so if I say this room is square, the concept that I'm using to talk about this room, namely, is square. And so all people who are rational and who are adults and have sufficient vocabulary, they know what the word square means. So they can look around. If somebody says this room is square, they can look around and see, they have this concept in their head, square. They can look at the room and they can see that this room is determined by that concept, namely square. And then it becomes something universal. Everyone can see for themselves that the room is square. anything, any other bit of knowledge about any artwork or anything beautiful or ugly in the world, anything. These are cumulus clouds, these are cirrus clouds, or whatever you say. This is information given. Kant calls those cognitive judgments or logical judgments. Okay, sometimes you just have to get with the language that a philosopher is using. So we can understand quite clearly how cognitive judgments or knowledge judgments are universal, because that concept is something universal. If I say, cats are naturally nocturnal, then I'm giving some information. So everybody knows what the word cat means. Everyone knows naturally. Everyone knows nocturnal means they come awake at night. And so that's a universal cognitive judgment. And when I say that, I want it to be universally valid for everyone. Now, the strange thing about the judgments of taste is that they're universal, but they don't rely on any concept. So what do they rely on? What does that universality rely on? And what kind of universality is it? That's what he talks about in moment 2. And one of the beautiful things about these 4 moments is that, as I said last time, they sort of make possible, the first one makes possible the second one, and the first 2 make possible the third, and the first 3 make possible the fourth. So how does moment 2 sort of grow out of moment 1? Well, what was the main thing about moment 1? That the satisfaction that one gains when one is experiencing something beautiful or making judgments of taste is that it's disinterested. Now, if you think about what disinterested means, it means that it's not relying on any desire on my part. Now, usually desires are particular. So the very fact that it's disinterested leads one to think that when I see something or hear something or experience it in any way, any artwork or the beauty in nature too. By the way, I didn't tell you this, but it should be said. He's talking about beauty both in art and in nature. So there are things in life that are just beautiful. They're not artworks. And then there are works of art that are beautiful. And then there are degrees of beauty. Some just are really hit you, hard as being, they're moving and quite beautiful. And then some are sort of good, but they're not great. And then there are things that are just downright pathetic, and they try to be beautiful, but they're not. And then they're just ugly things too. By the way, ugly things can be beautiful too. They're grotesque. Sometimes artists create like tragedies or murder mysteries, and there's nothing beautiful about murder itself or about a tragedy, but if it's put together well, then something ugly can be beautiful, so, but let's not complicate things. So the thing he focuses on mostly in section 6, which is the first part of the second moment, is that the beautiful is that which, apart from any concepts, is represented as the object of a universal satisfaction. So the satisfaction, he says, is the very fact that it's disinterested, which is the main point of moment 1, implies, that's the key word here, that the ground of satisfaction that I'm getting when I see something beautiful is rooted in all human beings. Now, this is the thing we have, it's very easy to distort Kant's meaning here, because this is not easy reading, actually. That's why I'm trying to do my best to clarify. It's very easy to misinterpret Kant. When Kant says that this satisfaction is universal, like I see something beautiful. Let me share something that happened last night. Like before I went to bed last night, since I was watching the polls and I was getting worried about who was going to win, and so I thought I'd just watch something beautiful on YouTube. So I just went on YouTube and it just popped up for some reason. You know, it watches you when you whatever you search on YouTube, then it starts showing you those things because it knows what you like and all that stuff. So it popped up Gene Kelly. He was a great dancer before my time even, but there's this film. It's called Singing in the Rain, and there's one dance that he does, which is on YouTube. It's just an excerpt from the film called Singing in the Rain, where Gene Kelly, one of the great dancers of all time, American dancer, he does this incredible dance and it's with the music and sings, and it's just downright beautiful. There's no doubt. So let me just use that as an example. In fact, you can use that in your analysis if you'd like. I'm going to extend it to anything you think is beautiful that's a film. I'll let you use that if you can't find that one film that was recommending, Swing Time with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. You can use any film that you think expresses the beautiful. We'll talk about that later. So I see that as beautiful, his dancing in that scene. What Kant is saying here is that when I make that judgment, this is beautiful, that predicate, beauty, beautiful, uh, attributed to that scene or whatever you think is beautiful, I'm imputing. It's a very carefully chosen word. They translate it as impute. I'm not sure what the German word is, but they're translating impute. What you assume that others will find it beautiful too. Now, the very fact that that satisfaction that I'm feeling is disinterested leads me to think that it has nothing to do with my own idiosyncrasies. I do love dance, and I think that body in motion. I mean, do you ever think about it? Dance is the only art form where the human body becomes the very medium out of which the art is made, and so on. There's wonderful things you could say about dance, and I happen to like dance. But what Kant is saying, it's not the fact that Joseph, me, loves dance, and that's why I think it's beautiful. That's not what's going on in my subjectivity. What's going on is this is beautiful. But the beauty is not in the dance for Kant. It's going on inside of me. And I get this feeling that everyone who sees this will see this as beautiful or ought to. Now, here's where you can be very misleading. You could misinterpret Kant. He's not saying that everyone will in fact agree. You may not even like this scene or things that I like. You know, do you ever hear the expression beauty is in the eyes of the beholder? And usually what people mean by that is what you think is beautiful may not be what I think is beautiful. Well, that's not really true for Kant. For Kant, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, but it's not something particular. See, usually when people say beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, that means what they mean by that is what you think is beautiful may not be what I think is beautiful. It's all relative, you know. Well, Kant is not saying that. He's saying it is in the eyes of the beholder. It's in our subjectivity. So it's something subjective. It's not objective. It's not in the object. It's in our subject, but it's universal. So what he means by that universality is that we assume that others will find it beautiful too. I impute that others will find it beautiful. But empirically speaking, if I actually ask people, do you love Gene Kelly? You know, no, I don't like it that much. I don't like those Hollywood classics. They're dated and they're kind of stupid, you know, or they may not agree. That's fine. Kant is fine with that. All he's saying is when we do make beauty judgments of taste, we assume that others will find it beautiful too. There's some universality there. And it does, I mean, empirically, if you share a work of art or something that you really love and you think is beautiful, like if I had a friend and I played that little excerpt that I saw last night, Jim Kelly dancing, singing in the rain, and he thought, yeah, it's all right, I might not say anything, to save our friendship, but I'm thinking, oh my God, what's wrong with this person? I mean, you know, how could he not see that as beautiful? I mean, so, but that's not what Kant's saying. I'm just using that to help clarify a point. He's saying the very fact that the satisfaction we feel when we deem something beautiful, the very fact that it's disinterested, that it doesn't rely on any desires on my part, leads me to think that all people will find it beautiful. So here's how Kant says it. Since it, namely the beauty, does not rest on any inclination in the subject, by inclination it means desire, nor upon any other premeditated interest, any desire in any sense. But since the person who judges feels himself quite free as regards the satisfaction which he attaches to the object, by free he means liberated from, I don't find it good, I don't find it pleasant, I don't find it estimable, like the morally good, or I don't find it useful, but I find it beautiful. And along with that comes this satisfaction that's free of any desire. The very fact that it's free, that it's free of desires, he cannot find the ground of satisfaction in any private conditions. Private, that means idiosyncrasies. If you don't know that word, by the way, when you read, if you don't know words, then just look them up. You can find them quickly on YouTube, or or when I'm talking. If you don't, idiosyncrasy means something that's pertaining to me and may not pertain to anyone else. What's unique to my own individuality. He cannot find the ground of this disinterested satisfaction in any private condition connected to his own subject, and hence it must be regarded as grounded on what he can presuppose in every person. I assume that everybody will find it beautiful. But again, it needs to be qualified. They may not, but that's fine. He's just saying these are the conditions that make possible when we say something is beautiful. And again, the beauty is not in the object, it's in the subject. Consequently, he goes on, he must believe that he has reason for attributing a similar satisfaction to everyone. So, of course, we know, like my wife was watching that same excerpt from YouTube and she found it beautiful too. But we weren't experiencing the same thing at the same time. That's not what Kant is saying. But generally speaking, that same kind of feeling pervaded our subjectivity. He will therefore speak, Kant goes on, of the beautiful as if it were a characteristic of the object. We speak as if beauty were a characteristic of the object. And the judgment a logical one, namely, like I'm giving information about it. Although it is only aesthetical and involves merely a reference of the representation of the object to the subject. He goes on, it has a similarity to logical judgments that we can presuppose its validity for all people. See, the cognitive judgment, like if I say, this is Gene Kelly, and this is an excerpt from a film called Singing in the Rain. Those are logical judgments. And it can be validated. All you need to know is find out who is Gene Kelly, watch the film, there he is, Gene Kelly. And this is the film, Singing in the Rain. That's obviously an excerpt from that film. So it's universal. But if I say, what a beautiful scene that is, watching Gene Kelly dance, and sing that song, Singing in the Rain. It's similar, Kant says, to logical judgments in that they're universal. But the cognitive judgment is universal objectively. And this is the big innovative insight that Kant came up with in the Critique of Judgment. That aesthetic judgments are universal, but they're subjective. So he came up with this concept of subjective universality. Usually things that are subjective are particular, like judgments of the pleasant. Like I like purple and someone else doesn't like purple. That's in fact the very example he uses. Those are judgments of the pleasant. Those are subjective, but they're particular. So judgments of the pleasant are similar to judgments of taste in that both are subjective. But the big difference is judgments of taste are subjective, but they're universal. And then judgments of taste are similar to cognitive judgments in that they're universal. Both are universal, the cognitive judgment and the judgment of taste. But the big difference is cognitive judgments are objective and judgments of taste are subjective. So he comes up with this concept of subjective universality. In fact, those are the last two words of section 6 of the Analytic of the Beautiful. He goes on, consequently, the judgment of taste, accompanied with the consciousness of separation from all interest, he's hearkening back to moment 1, it must claim validity for every man, every human being, without this universality depending on any object. Okay? That is, there must be bound up with it a title to subjective universality. So this is an innovative insight on Kant's part, to talk about something being subjectively universal. So that's the gist of section 6. And section 7, he compares the beautiful with the pleasant and the good. And as regards the pleasant, everyone is content that his judgment, which he bases on private feeling, and by which he says of the object that it pleases him, should be limited to their own person. We don't need to belabor this too much, but so it is pleasant when something is pleasant. He's using very carefully chosen words, but he's talking about a very big difference in experience. So when it comes to something that appeals to your desires, those appeal to your idiosyncrasy. So, for example, there's this wonderful food, Italian food, which I'm going to try to make. It's called focaccia. It's wonderful stuff. So if you go on YouTube, you can watch the Italian grandma make it, and I watched it the other night. And focaccia, I've had it before, but when it's homemade from scratch, it's really wonderful. It probably takes 2 or 3 times to do it, to get it right, and you have to have the right ovens and everything. But it's wonderful stuff. It's called focaccia. Okay, so if I make that and it comes out pretty well, and I eat it, I say, wow, this is wonderful. I love focaccia. I love this focaccia. Now somebody else may eat it and they don't like it. Maybe they don't like sun-dried tomatoes. In fact, my wife doesn't like sun-dried tomatoes. I want to make it, but I can't put the sun-dried tomatoes. So we're going to put like bell peppers or something. And then there's olives, the black olives, not the kind you get in cans, but they're little wrinkled black olives. You have to put those in there. So and she doesn't like those either. So I don't know how I'm going to make it. But there's other ingredients. It's called focaccia. You can check it out. So I like focaccia. Somebody else may not like focaccia. So that's fine, because when we say that pleases me, I mean it pleases me. And if you don't like it, I don't get all worried about that too much, because I'm not imputing that all people should find it wonderful. Although I do wonder why people couldn't not like that, but who knows why. So he goes, it is pleasant to me. And that's judgments of the pleasant. Remember I said they're subjective, but they're particular. And they're based on interest. So they're not judgments of taste. So he says this is the case not only as regards the taste of the tongue, the palate, and the throat. He's talking about like food. But for whatever else is pleasant to anyone's eyes and ears. To one, violet color, not purple, it's violet that he uses. Violet color is soft and lovely. To another, it is washed out and dead. One man likes the tone of wind instruments. I was thinking of my father who plays trumpet. and another that of strings, which was me. I like this sound of strings, so I play guitar. So what he's saying is that when it comes to the appeal to the five senses, these are particular, and these are judgments of the pleasant. So as regards the pleasant, therefore, the fundamental proposition is valid. Everyone has his own taste. These are the taste of sense. So when people say beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, Kant would say, he would qualify that. First of all, okay, it is. Judgments of taste are in the eyes of the beholder in the sense that they're subjective, but they're not relative. They're not particular to the beholder. So usually when people say that, they mean what you think is beautiful is not what I think is, and that's not very Kantian. But judgments of the pleasant are particular. So it isn't, judgments of the pleasant are in the senses, not just the eyes, the senses of the beholder. So he goes on, many things may have for him charm and pleasantness. No one troubles himself about that. But if he gives out anything as beautiful, he supposes in others the same satisfaction. That's what I was talking about. He judges not merely for himself, but for everyone. Okay? So I may not think that when I'm experiencing something beautiful, that everyone should think this is beautiful, but this is what I'm assuming, that all people will find it beautiful. I speak of beauty as though it were a property of things, but really it's in this feeling, this harmonious feeling that's taking place. And I want to talk about that harmony. Well, Kant talks about that harmony in a more detailed way in a minute. So we say of the thing is beautiful. And he does not count on the agreement of others with this, his judgment of satisfaction, because he has found this agreement several times before, but he demands it of them. In other words, now he's starting to split hairs, but he's not saying, I don't say this is beautiful because all other people found it beautiful, and now I'm going to find it beautiful too. I don't need their assent to find something beautiful. I just find it beautiful and I assume this universality. Here then, we cannot say that each man has his or her own particular taste, for this would be as much as to say that there's no taste whatsoever, no aesthetic judgment which can make a rightful claim upon anyone's assent. So it gets a little complicated, I know, but I find it ingenious. It's difficult to talk about the beautiful, because there's so many approaches to it, and beauty is this weird kind of thing that doesn't really fit in anywhere. So Kant is doing a great job. But here the universality is only taken comparatively. Oh, he makes one more point at the end of section 7 about, let's say, like somebody, actually, you don't need to worry too much about this last point. At the same time, we find as regards the pleasant that there's an agreement among men in their judgments upon. Thus we say of a man who knows how to entertain his guests with pleasures. Let's say somebody has a party and they have all the Epicurean delights, and they do, and they set it up such that everyone is all well pleased. And then they say of the man, well, he's got good taste. He sets up a party with a buffet and does it up right and has all these wonderful foods, and this man surely has good taste. Well, Kant is saying this is a social judgment being made. It's really, here the universality is only taken comparatively. This man has good taste because he makes good parties that are better than other kinds of people's parties. And he's trying to show the difference of what he's talking about. The difference in the universality of those two judgments. And then he just has one little sentence at the end of that. In respect of the good, remember there's two kinds of the good. The good is purposeful or useful, and then there's the good as the good in itself, which is the morally good. In respect of the good, it is true that judgments make rightful claim to validity for everyone, but he wants to claim that they're based on concepts and they're based on interest. So the interest is we esteem, we respect a particular person who rises up to this virtuous concept, like this person is truthful, this person is courageous, this person is temperate. Those are all concepts. So when we judge something as good, it's based on a concept, and it's based on desire. Namely, we want to emulate those kinds of virtues, or those kinds of actions. So he differentiates the good in this way. So section 8, the universality of the satisfaction is represented in the judgment of taste as only subjective. He returns again to the subjectivity. So he says, first, we must be fully convinced of the fact that in a judgment of taste, that is about the beautiful, the satisfaction in the object is imputed to everyone. Now, everyone may not agree. I know I keep saying that, but that's important to keep in mind. But it's not based on a concept. So that's the difference between that and between judgments of the beautiful and objective cognitive judgments. Then he goes down at the bottom, about in the middle of the page, section 8. Now here's something strange. As regard the taste of sense, those are judgments of the pleasant. You have to keep these, just keep all these judgments different. You can use, you can use the judgments of sense, those are judgments of the pleasant. Those are particular and subjective. Then there's judgments of the good, and that is the purposeful, the good as useful, and then the good as the good in itself, the morally good. Those are universal, but they're based on concepts. Then there are cognitive judgments. Those are universal, like this room is square, or any information that you can know about a work of art or about anything in nature. All those are based on concepts, and they're universal, but they're objective. So the beauty judgments are subjective and universal. There's another, he repeats himself because he's approaching the same ideas from different perspectives. So I don't want to just keep on repeating things, but I'm trying to just move on in the text carefully, but at the same time, not repeat the ideas as much. He makes some new point here in section 8, about halfway through. He says, in respect of logical quantity, all judgments of taste are singular judgments. What he means by that is this. When we make a judgment, if I say all dancers are, if I say dancers are athletic, that's a cognitive judgment. And I'm talking about all dancers. Now that may be not true or not true, but that's not the point. The point is, if I say dancers are athletic, I mean all dancers are athletic. So that's a universal statement, and it's objective. But when I make a beauty judgment or judgment of taste, it's singular in this sense, not singular in the sense of judgments of the pleasant that appeal to my own idiosyncrasies. This singularity he's talking about, you always have to return words to the context, because sometimes the same word means something different in different contexts. The singularity he's talking about here in the middle of section 8 is this particular beautiful thing, whether it be a work of art or something from nature. So for example, my experience last night with Gene Kelly dancing, I met this scene with Gene Kelly dancing and singing in the rain, from this film, Singing in the Rain, this particular work of art, that itself is filling me with this subjective universality. And I attribute then the beauty to the thing, to the scene, but really it's what that scene evokes inside of me. Okay. So that's what he means by the logical quantity. In other words, we're making a judgment about a particular thing, not about all things. Like if I say this rose is, if I say rose, and that, in fact, that's the example he gives of a rose. He clarifies it quite nicely on, for example, he says, I describe by a judgment of taste the rose that I see as beautiful. So this rose, let's say I have a rose here. I say, this rose is beautiful. So this is a judgment of taste. But if I say roses are beautiful, that's a cognitive judgment, because I'm not talking about this rose. I'm talking about all roses. So judgments of taste pertain to particular things, although they evoke in us a sense of universality, not particularity, which we impute that others will feel. Okay. So again, the judgment, the rose is pleasant. Let's say, he's distinguishing it. See, the same rose can be spoken of. If I have a rose here, and if I say, oh, it smells so good. Now that's a judgment of the pleasant because it appeals to my sense of smell, and I happen to like the smell of roses. Someone else may not. That's a judgment of the pleasant, or a judgment of sense. If I say roses are beautiful, I can still be holding this rose. Roses are beautiful. I'm not talking about this rose, really. I'm talking about all roses. So that's a cognitive judgment. But if I have the rose and I say, what a beautiful thing. Look how beautiful it is. Now that's an aesthetic judgment, because it's a disinterested, it's not based on my particular idiosyncrasies that I like the smell of roses. It's not based on the fact that I like roses, I think the roses are beautiful, therefore this thing has to be beautiful. It's based on this particular rose, and I say, look how beautiful it is. The other important, there's just a few more ideas here that I just want to share with you to clarify the second moment. So when I say the very fact that this universality that I'm feeling is something that I impute to others, that it's universal, that presupposes, philosophers are always looking to the condition for the possibility. They're always going deep underneath. What are like when they have something here, they ask, well, what is the condition for the possibility of that? And they get to this, something deeper. Then they ask, well, what is the condition for the possibility of that? And they go something deeper. Then they're always looking for the ground, the foundation. And that's one of the appealing things of philosophy. So how can there be this subjective universality in judgments of taste? Well, he says the only way that can be, since it's not appealing to any idiosyncrasy on my part, or any desires on my part, and it's not based on concepts, it must be this assumption that there's this universal voice, this kind of common sense that all people possess. Like when I'm experiencing Gene Kelly dancing and I think it's beautiful, I assume that others will find it beautiful. Kant is saying now that the very fact that I can make such an assumption presupposes a deeper assumption, that there's this universal voice, that there's this common sense of the human race, that when they're in possession, when they experience something, this particular thing, that they will find it beautiful also. Again, they may not, empirically speaking, for some reason, but that's not shaking what Kant's saying. He's just saying when you do experiencing something beautiful, you assume that others will find it beautiful too. So you assume this universal voice, this common sense of the, and you postulate this. He goes on, we may see now that in the judgment of taste, nothing is postulated by such a universal voice in respect of the satisfaction without the intervention of concepts, and thus the possibility of aesthetic judgments that can at the same time be regarded as possible for everyone. The judgment of taste itself does not postulate the agreement of everyone, for that can only be done by a logical universal judgment, because it can adduce reason. It only imputes. So I'm not sure of the German word, and now I'm curious. I want to find my German translation here and look it up. But probably the word impute is the closest English word we have to whatever the German word is. Impute, we assume that others will agree that it's beautiful. So he's saying that logically speaking, then, the very fact that this subjective universality is happening when I make a judgment of taste, it presupposes this universal voice, this common sense of the human race. The other idea I think that's probably worth, and this is probably one of the most important ideas. It comes in the section 9 of the second moment. He numbers all the sections of the Analytic of the Beautiful consecutively. So like 1 through sections 1 through 6 all are pertaining to the first moment. Then from 6 to 9, those all pertain to the second moment. And the big ideas from the last section, section 9, is this idea of the reflective judgment. So judgments of the beautiful, Kant claims, are reflective judgments. Okay. So now those are the same. The reflective judgment is the same as the judgment of taste. And the judgment of taste is the same as judgments of the beautiful. You just have to remember those three are synonyms. And distinguish those from judgments of the pleasant or judgments of sense. Those are the same, but they're not judgments of the beautiful. And then there's cognitive judgments, which give information about something. And then there's judgments of the useful and judgments of the good in itself. The good is two kinds. The good is useful and the good in itself. Useful is a means for something else. And the good in itself is an end unto itself. Both are based on concepts and both are based on interest. So what's going on in the subjectivity of a person such that they attribute this object, this thing as beautiful? Again, the beauty is not in the object, it's in the subject. What's happening is there's this free play. This is my favorite idea from Kant in the Critique of Judgment. The free play. In the reflective judgment, which is a judgment of taste, there's this free play between the imagination and the understanding. Now, what Kant conceives of with the imagination is this power of the human mind to combine stimuli and make images. The imagination makes images, and it also deconstructs images and combines other things together. Like something from some other image and puts it with this thing. That's why when you dream, sometimes, do you ever notice how your dreams sort of combine different parts of your experience into a kind of collage of experiences? So the imagination is a synthesizing and a combining and a deconstructing power of the mind. It constructs and deconstructs and creates new images. The understanding, though, uses concepts, like whatever they are, Now, there are empirical concepts like dance, and then there are what he calls a priori concepts. Those are more universal, like substance, causality, time, space. These are before any experience. And then there's empirical concepts, or a posteriori. I'm not going to ask you these kind of things, but it's coming out of me because I know Kant pretty well. So cognitive judgments are based on concepts. That's all you need to know. Now, so you have the imagination and the understanding. When you make a cognitive judgment, like when I say, this is Gene Kelly dancing in the film, singing in the rain, that's a cognitive judgment because it's based on the concept Gene Kelly, the film Dancing in the Rain, and so on. But when I make an aesthetic judgment and I deem something beautiful, like I say, what a beautiful scene this is, what's happening is the imagination is playing freely with the understanding. It doesn't matter if it's Gene Kelly. It doesn't matter. I mean, from as far as the beauty of this scene, it doesn't matter who's dancing. It's just this man. It doesn't even matter if it's a man. In fact, there's one moment where he jumps up on a lamppost and he lands there. And I turned to my wife and says, it looked like he just landed like a bird landing on a tree. You know how lightly birds can just boom on the lightest branch. And how different that is from somebody who couldn't dance as well. You know, if you jump up on a lamppost and put both feet up sideways, you know, and look like you just flew up there. You know, he did that in that one little moment. And I said, well, it looked like a bird. He looked like a bird landing. And she says, I know. And, you know, so what happened right there at that moment? He looked like a bird landing. There's no bird in the scene or anything. That was my imagination working. And it looked like a bird to me. You know, it was a man, of course, but it landed like a bird on the lamppost. My imagination is playing freely with my understanding. And it's okay. You let that happen when you're experiencing something as beautiful. Don't try to lock it down and say, you know, this is Gene Kelly dancing. I mean, it's fine. It is Gene Kelly dancing in the film, in the rain, singing in the rain, and so on. But if you're caught up in cognitive judgments, the beauty is just going to go right over your head. You're not going to be experiencing anything as beautiful. I remember once years ago, this is just a little aside. I was at the Cleveland Art Museum. I was quite young. This was a long time ago. I'm pretty old now. So, and there happened to be a show by Paul Klee, a great artist, an abstract expressionist. And there was an art historian taking a group through there. And she was saying all kinds of really astute things about the paintings and people paying, you know, to be guided by this art historian, and which was all fine. But they were all caught up in cognitive judgments, learning about Paul Klee and about his paintings. And one woman had her daughter who was like 9 years old, 8, 7, something like that. Not a little toddler, but like 7, 8. And she was just enthralled by Paul Klee's work. In fact, Paul Klee's work looks like child drawings, only it's great stuff. His name is Paul Klee. And she was just enthralled. She was inside the painting, you know. And I thought to myself, of all these people, this little girl is having an aesthetic experience with art. The others are caught up in the cognitive side of it all, which is fine. I mean, it's nice to learn about Paul Klee, but you could have done that in the library or right on Google. You didn't need to go to the Cleveland Art Museum. And, you know, so Kant, you know, helped me a lot to understand art. All right, so this free play he talks about, this is something I'd like you to, the cognitive power, so there's a harmony that takes place inside your cognitive powers. And there's this free play that takes place. Let's listen to Kant a little bit here. And this is called the reflective judgment. So there's a reflection, you know, as you contemplate the beauty of some artwork, or again, it can be the beauty of nature too. By the way, things like tornadoes or meteor showers or the Grand Canyon. These are the sublime. Now, Kant has a whole discussion of the sublime too. We're not going into that. The sublime is something that overwhelms you. It's something overwhelming. The beauty is something is different. So he's talking about beauty here. He makes a big distinction between the sublime and the beautiful. Usually when I speak, I'm very careful. Like I'll never say, you know, something that's sublime. I don't say that it's beautiful. You know, I just, so let's listen to Kant a little bit. There's a particular state of mind, a general state of mind that's taking place. The cognitive powers, he says, which are involved by this representation are here in free play, because no definite concept limits them to a definite rule of cognition. So I may know it's Gene Kelly dancing in this film, Singing in the Rain, but that's not what's determining the beauty. The beauty is the movement of his body and what's happening inside my subjectivity. Hence, the state of mind in the representation must be the feeling of the free play of the representative powers in a given representation with reference to a cognition in general. And then he goes on, now a representation by which an object is given, that is to become a cognition in general, requires imagination for the gathering together of the manifold intuition. He's just saying the imagination is synthesizing these stimuli. And understanding for the unity of the concept uniting the representation. The state of free play of the cognitive faculties in a representation by which an object is given must be universally communicable, because cognition as the determination of, or sometimes, I'm trying to, you know, this is, the way he talks is hard, I know, but what you should strive to do, like remember I said right at the beginning, you want to paraphrase. You want to try to latch onto the idea and then put it in plain English if you can and simplify it, which I'm trying to do for you. So this state of mind is what he's talking about. It's this harmony of the cognitive faculties, namely the faculty of imagination and understanding. And by imagination, he has in mind the synthesizing and unifying, the synthesizing forces of the mind. And by the understanding, he means these concepts that we have in our mind. So that's the gist of it. And at the end, also there's something that I've picked up in my lap. I reread this morning so I could be more facile when I gave this talk now. But I reread this the second moment. And I found this passage at the end of the section 9 to be particularly interesting. He says, he speaks of more lively, of both mental powers. There's an animation or a kind of enhancement. So you feel stimulated when you experience it. There's something really healing and stimulating about experiencing something as beautiful. You feel like, I remember as a boy going through the storm and stress of being a teenager and so on. And when I first got my license, I had a little sports car, a little English Sunbeam Alpine. I loved it. And I drove from Ashtabula, where I grew up, to the Cleveland Museum of Art. And I would just go there by myself. And it was free. It still is free. It's one of the, and you can park, you know, for a quarter somewhere. And I remember after leaving the museum, I felt fine. I felt good. I felt stimulated. I felt cheerful, you know, and so it had a kind of psychological effect, a healing kind of effect. And I've always felt that way about art, that it's stimulating. And Kant does touch on that idea, but he's not really into that too much. But he does talk, he says, no other consciousness is possible than that through the sensation of the effect, which consists in a more lively play of both mental powers, a more lively play of the imagination and the understanding, which animated by mutual agreement So the very fact that there's this harmonious accordance between my imagination, my understanding, it enlivens. It's sort of like being with somebody who's like-minded, and after you leave, you feel more alive because you're with somebody who's like-minded. You know, there's a kind of, so since the imagination is in accord and playing freely with the understanding, it's like looking up at the clouds and you're seeing all kinds of things, shapes and forms. Ah, yeah, I'm glad I brought that up. Did you ever? You must have done that. Everyone's done that, especially when you're children. Look up at the clouds and see what you see, right? And you see these different images, different shapes, and you ask your friend, do you see this? Do you see the, you know, whatever. So that's what Kant is talking about. When you're experiencing the beauty of something, allow this free play to go on between the imagination and the understanding. And that's fine. Just let it happen. What's important is this feeling, this state of mind. And this state of mind is something universal. Well, that's the best I can do on moment two. There's some other more subtle points, little distinctions he makes here and there that, and the languages, I must agree with you or people, anybody who is put off by the convoluted and abstruse language of philosophy. I put up with it because I know they're opening up new ideas, and because of that, language is being pushed to its limits. So, and Kant is notoriously difficult the way he speaks, but there's a way of extracting the essence of the idea, the key ideas, and pulling it out, making it your own. But you don't want to be too loose in your interpretation either at first, because you don't want to distort the ideas. It's quite easy to distort things when you read Kant, especially. All right, this is taking a little bit more longer than I wanted to, but if I go too fast, then it's not going to help anybody. So I'm just going to make 4 videos. I'll try to make the next one shorter if I can, and and we'll move into the 3rd and 4th moment of the Analytic of the Beautiful from Kant's Critique of Judgment.